PlayStation's new hero shooter Concord just wrapped up its second and final beta weekend, and things are not looking great. Player numbers are extremely weak, even during a fully free-to-play open beta weekend. Meanwhile, a lot of people are taking to social media to tear the game down. Ever since Concord's first gameplay reveal, all of its trailers get more dislikes than likes on YouTube, and their social media pages are filled with people saying the game shouldn't even be released. So I did something that a lot of people aren't doing. Over the last 2 weekends, I spent a decent amount of time with Concord. I went in with an open mind and I gave it a legitimate chance. And I have a lot to say about it, so let's just get right into it. Concord has taken elements from a lot of popular things. You will immediately see the influence things like Overwatch, Destiny, and Guardians of the Galaxy had on the game. Combining a ton of popular things sounds great, right? If you combine a bunch of things people already love, what could possibly go wrong? But here's the problem with that. If you make a game with similarities to Overwatch, people will fall into one of two camps. Either A, they don't like Overwatch and therefore don't see a game having similarities to it as a good thing, or B, they like Overwatch, but in that case, they probably just play Overwatch. And if this new game doesn't offer something that's significantly better than Overwatch, then what reason does anyone have to switch? If Concord wants to try to draw in Overwatch's audience, Marvel's audience, or Destiny's audience, it needs to offer something special that makes it stand out. And unfortunately, I don't think it does that. So with that in mind, let's talk about the game now. When you open up Concord for the first time, you'll be met with a cutscene featuring the characters. These cutscenes are actually a pretty important element of the game, and the developers have placed a big focus on them. As the developers have described it, there will be one new short cutscene each week, including more lore about the characters and the world, and tying it into what's happening in the game world. As a basic example, a cutscene may feature the characters finding a new planet on the same day that the developers are releasing a new map. I think that's a decent concept. It's different from other live service games, which often have almost no in-game story at all. But I'm just not sure that this is the big hook that they think it is. Do they really expect weekly cutscenes to keep people engaged and logging back in? First of all, these cutscenes will get uploaded to YouTube within minutes, so there's no reason you have to log in to see them. But even besides that, if you're someone who really cares about these cutscenes, then you're probably someone who likes Concord, in which case you're already playing constantly and logging in regardless of if there's a new cutscene or not. So I'm just not really sure what the goal with these cutscenes was, other than to just say they did it. And honestly, a weekly cutscene seems like a pretty time-consuming and expensive thing to do, and I'm just not really sure what they're gonna gain from it. As for the cutscenes themselves though, they look gorgeous, with some of the best mocap I've ever seen. Unfortunately though, I have a major issue here. So I mentioned how the game is heavily inspired by Guardians of the Galaxy, right? Well, there's nothing wrong with that. Everything is inspired by something. It's almost impossible to create anything nowadays that hasn't been done by someone, somewhere, at some point. But there's a very thin line between being inspired by something versus ripping off something. And man, Concord is really pushing it. Not only is the general theme, setting, and vibe of Concord very similar to Guardians of the Galaxy, but many of the characters almost seem like parodies of the Guardians. This main guy with the mohawk and the pistols is so similar to Star-Lord. He even has a line where he says buddy, and I swear to God, I thought it was Chris Pratt for a second. It literally sounded like a line ripped from Guardians. And then there's this girl with the fire crossbow thing. She's cold and acts mean, but when something good happens, she lightens up and shows that she does care about the crew. So in other words, she's literally Gamora. And then the worst offender of it all is this guy, a big, strong, alien-like character who is blue and red. Despite being super strong, he's stupid and acts as comic relief. I just described Drax. Except Drax is green and red instead of blue, I guess. I mean, at this point, the only way you could have been more on the nose with it is if they had a talking animal. Honestly, it completely took me out of it and ruined any potential immersion or connection I could have had to these characters and this world. Because instead, my first reaction upon opening Concord was laughing at how similar these characters are to the Guardians of the Galaxy. Speaking of these characters, this is another aspect of the game that has been getting a lot of flack. People really do not like these character designs, and for the most part, I would have to agree. The character designs range from not bad to kind of off-putting to just generally strange and unpleasant to look at. I feel bad saying what I'm going to say next because clearly a lot of love and work went into these designs, but I don't know if I've ever been so turned off by a cast of characters before. I couldn't quite put my finger on what the problem was until I randomly clicked on Shroud's stream where he was playing the game. And what he mentioned was that the characters kind of creeped him out because they were so well animated. The way their entire faces moved so realistically almost gave it an uncanny Uncanny Valley vibe. And that's when it clicked for me, because that is totally what the problem is. The animation is actually too good. I found myself missing the more cartoony style found in games like Overwatch, because yeah, these characters can be pretty creepy at times. However, if you can get past the Guardians of the Galaxy parody intro and the slightly unnerving character designs, there is actually a pretty decent game waiting for you. Because yeah, I want to be clear, I don't think Concord is a bad game. I actually think at a gameplay level, it is pretty good. Most of the characters have fun and unique kits. The developers did a great job making each character feel different from one another. And the second you start playing as a new character, you will immediately pick up on their strengths and weaknesses, which to me is proof of really solid game design. The tank-like characters are slow and methodical, just as they should be. The quicker, twitchier characters have the right balance of being mobile while still being punishable. And the more basic all-around characters have the perfect mix of being good in most areas without feeling overpowered. The gunplay is solid, the maps flow really well, the performance is about as good as you can expect from the beta, and the graphics are beautiful. But Concord is missing something. It's missing that one thing that hooks you and makes you want to keep playing. That one thing that makes you fall in love with the game and choose to play it over the countless other live service games on the market. To be completely honest with you, I'm not even sure what that one thing is, because it's different for every game. But I know that Concord doesn't have it. And I know that because despite having fun with it, I never really felt like I needed to keep playing, and I didn't feel particularly sad when the beta ended. Unfortunately for PlayStation and for Concord, being just good isn't good enough. The market this game is in is way too competitive. And on top of that, I think this $40 price point is going to prove very troublesome. I'm a pretty firm believer that most live service games should be free to play. I know that is not a popular opinion, but I really do stand by it. It's unfortunate that free to play games often come alongside so much microtransactions and other garbage, because the general concept of it is perfect for a multiplayer game. And I say that because it gets new players into your game constantly. There's no risk to downloading a free game and giving it a shot. If you end up not liking it, you just delete it and move on. But when something costs money, there's more hesitation there. And a trend I have noticed amongst a lot of live service games that cost money is that they get stuck in a loop. People don't want to spend money on the game, so it doesn't get a lot of players initially. And now that the game doesn't have a lot of players, no one new wants to buy in because they don't want to spend money on a game that could be dead. But now the game is dead because no one new is buying in. So now you're stuck in that loop. Concord seems to be on a crash course for this. Now, I can understand why PlayStation is going for this $40 price point though, because it worked out perfectly for their other live service game this year, Helldivers 2. Helldivers 2 didn't follow the free-to-play method, instead also being sold for $40. That game became the biggest game of the year, but the difference is Helldivers has that one thing. Helldivers is special, it's unique, it filled a void in the gaming landscape, and is genuinely one of the most fun video games I have ever played. Helldivers 2 is also full of crazy and hilarious moments which helped it blow up on social media. Concord just doesn't have any of that. It's a well-made arena shooter, but it doesn't have anything that would make anyone take a second look at it. I know that sounds harsh, but I'm just trying to be realistic. And I want to reiterate that this is not coming from a place of hate. This is coming from someone who enjoyed the hours I spent playing the beta. But I'm also someone who has spent a lot of time with these kinds of games. And I've seen a lot of them come and go. And Concord gives me all the signs of a game that just won't last. So what now? Is Concord savable? PlayStation better hope it is, because they have a lot of commitment into this game. Concord has been in development for quite a while, and Sony actually acquired the developers of the game, Firewalk Studios, back in April 2023. Purchasing a company like Firewalk before they have even released a single game meant that Sony had to have been pretty confident in what they were seeing. And even though it probably didn't cost that much to buy Firewalk because they were a brand new studio, it was still probably a decent chunk of change. And no doubt Sony has spent even more money since then supporting the rest of the development and now dealing with the marketing costs. Not to mention, by buying the studio, Sony now has to deal with the repercussions if it fails. They can't just move on and forget about it. If this game flops as hard as it looks like it's going to, Sony's looking at serious losses and a lot of egg on their faces. But what is the solution? A move to free to play instead of $40 seems like the obvious choice, but it's not really that easy. Firewalk has said all new characters will be completely free, and the game doesn't seem to have a huge focus on things like cosmetics. So in other words, they would have no way to monetize the game if they went free to play. So even if the game took off in that state, they're not gaining anything. But regardless, I'm not so sure free-to-play would even help anyway. This second beta weekend was completely free-to-play, and no one cared at all. Why would making it free at launch change that? I saw a Twitter thread suggesting they delay Concord to work on both the game itself and the monetization systems to prepare for a free-to-play launch. But honestly, that may be more trouble than it's worth for Sony, especially because if the game still flops after that delay, you're just looking at even bigger losses. As scary as it is to say, I think Concord is in way too deep at this point. They need to just go through with their launch plan at this point and hope that something comes along down the line that gets people engaged. Crazier things have happened, so it's not impossible. And like I said, the core game is good, which is often the hardest part, so I'm not going to completely rule out a surprise fandom forming for this one. But at the end of the day, until Concord can show consumers a reason they should want to play, they aren't going to play, free or not. It does hurt me to be so negative about the game because, as I will keep reiterating, I think the core gameplay is really solid. But if your characters are unappealing and if your world is bland and weirdly similar to its inspirations, I can't say I'm surprised that only a couple thousand people even cared enough to download a free beta. I'm not going to sit here and hope that the game fails as so many others have done, but what I am going to tell you is, based on what I'm seeing so far and what I know about this industry, Concord is not going down a good path. Because as it stands right now, we may be looking at one of the biggest flops of the year.